Hello again. This YouTube video is a postscript to my Maverick leadership video. In it, when I am saying my heroes have always been Mavericks, three names scroll along the bottom of the screen. Jobs, Velikovsky, and Shoemaker. Steve Jobs, Manuel Velikovsky, and Eugene Shoemaker. Several people have wanted to know exactly who these three men were. This is my response to those requests. Steve Jobs is the best known of the three, as the power behind the Apple computer, the Macintosh, the iPod, and the iPhone. However, some of you may not know that he was also the founder of the modern Pixar animation studios, which he purchased from George Lucas and then changed from a service company making commercials into the powerful movie company that you see today. With the release of Toy Story, he ushered in the new age of animated movies. As a reward, Jobs is now the largest single shareholder of Walt Disney stock and has an honored seat on their board of directors. There is no doubt that Steve Jobs is the visionary of the computer age, a true maverick who time and again turned the world upside down. While Steve Wozniak was the person who created and built the first Apple computer, it was Jobs who made it famous. There were others, but because of Jobs, Apple won the race and started the personal computer age. Because of Jobs' vision and maverick personality, we have desktop publishing and everything that has come from that initial concept. He insisted that his $1,000 Macintosh computer be built to work seamlessly with a $10,000 printer and some new software from a small company called Adobe Systems. I'm sure he was told, there's no way anybody's going to purchase a $1,000 computer to run a $10,000 printer. Well, some have asked me about Bill Gates. Wasn't he also a visionary of the computer age? My answer is, the only thing Gates was really good at was making a lot of money off of other people's ideas. Before I go on, I need to divulge that Gates and Microsoft almost drove me into bankruptcy. The entire story is in my book, Lucky That Way. Gates is the true robber baron of the computer age. He got his fortune by stealing everything of value and then selling it as his own. The vast majority of his fortune has come from DOS and Windows, neither of which was an original product of Microsoft's. He purchased DOS from Seattle Computing, a small programming company in Seattle, Washington. It is interesting that MS-DOS was essentially identical to DR-DOS by Digital Research, the preeminent DOS company at the time. It is also interesting that both Seattle Computing and Microsoft were beta sites for Digital Research. What a coincidence. Regarding Windows, there is no doubt that it was initially a total ripoff of the Macintosh. I experienced this personally when I had an early peek at Windows when I was at Microsoft visiting a close associate, Tom Lopez, who was their VP of CD-ROM technology. However, that story is not important since the entire story has been told so well by Jennifer Edstrom and Marlon Eller, both Microsoft insiders, in their book, Barbarians Led by Bill Gates. While they may have had an axe to grind, I have no doubt that their story is essentially true. Personal history has shown me that. Getting back to Jobs, some have stated that he stole the graphical interface, what makes the Macintosh Macintosh, and Windows Windows. This is not true, and anyone believing this is ignorant of how innovation takes place. While the graphical interface was invented by Xerox at their Palo Alto Research Center, they also essentially invented the personal computer and the mouse. The graphical interface developed for the Macintosh looks nothing like the original Xerox interface. Essentially, Jobs visited the lab and realized immediately the power of the graphical interface. He asked if Xerox had any intentions of exploiting the technology and was told no. He then proceeded to hire the original developers and then go on to design and produce what we now know of as the Macintosh. This is how innovation takes place. Everything comes from something else. There's a major difference between developing something new from something that has preceded it and copying something already in existence. There's a major difference between creative writing and plagiarism. There's a major difference between Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. In the US, it's well understood that businesses need to stay focused on their basic business and not drift too far afield. This was the main reason that Xerox never took advantage of their original developments of the personal computer, the mouse, and the graphical interface. So how incredulous is it for a computer manufacturer to take on the music industry and win? Or even more incredulous for the same guy to take on the mobile phone industry and win again? Anyone who questions that Steve Jobs is the ultimate technology maverick, the true visionary of the computer age, is ignorant of the history and growth of technology in the later years of the 20th century and the early years of the 21st. It goes without saying that Emmanuel Velikovsky is not as well known as Steve Jobs. Actually, neither is Eugene Shoemaker. However, Velikovsky too was a maverick and the father of modern-day catastrophism. The concept that all major changes, geological, physiological, sociological, come from catastrophes. He based his concepts on the myths and legends of civilization and his expertise in psychiatry, stating that the myths and legends came from actual events in human history that humankind had forgotten, much like a person forgets extremely traumatic events. While he didn't have the science background to support many of his specific contentions, his basic thesis that catastrophe has played a major role in the Earth's history has now been well proven. It should be remembered that at the time of his writings, the consensus of modern science was that everything we know proceeded along evolutionary lines. This idea was taken directly from Darwin and extrapolated to include the geological history of the Earth. The disproving of this theory was the first major loss of the Darwinians, and I'm sure not the last. Velikovsky was a true maverick, raising his voice above the mass consensus and shouting to the world that the consensus was wrong, that evolutionary advances regarding the history of the Earth was bunk, that the major role was played by catastrophe. His reward? He was maligned and his reputation was destroyed. What happened to him was the moral equivalent of what happened to Copernicus and Galileo. When I met him and had him as a guest for the evening in my home in the late 70s, he was a broken man, full of hate and anger for the way that he had been treated. Eugene Shoemaker was a maverick from the very beginning. This was another instance, there are so many, when the scientific consensus was so very wrong. During the 50s, when Shoemaker was getting his PhD, it was believed that it was impossible for any meteors or comets of major size to strike the Earth, that they would break up in the atmosphere and therefore cause little damage, that the Earth's atmosphere was our ultimate protection from these outer space aliens. Scientists at the time looked down on anyone who believed that the Arizona meteor crater was actually caused by a meteor as woefully ignorant. Any educated person knew that the crater was caused by volcanic activity. Well, Shoemaker, as a graduate student, believed it was caused by a meteor and set out to prove it. The story is a long one and well told elsewhere. What's important here is that he developed the entire process for determining whether a crater was caused by a volcano or a meteor. And then, after proving the truth about the Arizona crater, proceeded to point out numerous other meteor craters around the world. However, initially most scientists refused to accept that meteor collisions played a significant role in the Earth's history, and the craters that Shoemaker was finding were anomalies, that the atmosphere still protected us from the vast majority of large meteors and comets. Shoemaker disagreed and became concerned that we didn't know enough about the Earth orbit crossing asteroids. Ultimately, he and his wife Caroline and a friend and associate David Levy had the opportunity to use a small telescope on Mount Palomar and began searching for Earth orbit crossing asteroids. Within a few short years, they discovered more of these asteroids than had been discovered in all of the years of history before they began looking. However, the spectacular achievement came in 1993 when Caroline noticed a blur on one of their photographic sky plates and determined that it was from a comet in the neighborhood of the planet Jupiter, and that the comet was on a collision course with that planet. Regardless of everything that Shoemaker had proven, there were still many scientists, possibly the majority, that didn't believe that comets or meteors could cause much damage. After all, comets were essentially large snowballs. So while the world waited to see what impact the Shoemaker-Levy 9 comets would have on Jupiter, many thought that the impacts would not even be noticed, not even by the Hubble Space Telescope. All the deniers, those who continued to hold the original scientific consensus, were proven wrong when Jupiter's surface was impacted by explosions, some of which were the size of the Earth, and all easily visible by every telescope viewing the planet at the time. Shoemaker's reward was the phenomenal coincidence, possibly synchronicity, that the maverick who proved that meteors and comets could cause major damage to other planetary bodies would be the same man whose small team of observers would discover the only comet in modern times to strike another planet, thereby proving the proof of his theory beyond a shadow of a doubt. These three men were true mavericks, and their contribution to our knowledge of how things work is so far beyond the pseudoscience of those best represented by Al Gore that it should be a crime, punishable by death, to even mention their names in the same sentence where his is mentioned. Thank you. Till next time, bye for now.